At 20, Asa Kendry had learned that a man could know the weight of a saddle by touch, the temper of a cow by the angle of her ears, and the coming edge of bad weather by the way horses stopped wasting motion, yet still know nothing about where he was allowed to sleep. The last ranch that had used him had called him a hand until the first snow reached the loading pens. Then the foreman paid him with 3 wrinkled bills, pointed down the county road, and said the bunkhouse was for men already on the winter book. Asa did not argue. He had argued at 16, after his mother died, in a town that sold its grain elevator for scrap. He had argued at 18, when a hay crew counted him as half pay because he was young and had no one waiting on the road to be offended on his behalf. By 20, he knew the narrow value of keeping his mouth shut. He took his bedroll, his canvas coat with the torn lining, a dented spade with the handle cut too short, and a coil of baling wire he had earned by fixing a gate nobody thanked him for fixing. He walked east because the storm came from the west, and because the east road had telephone poles, and because a person with no claim could still make a line out of things set straight across land. The afternoon was flat and pewter-colored. Dry grass bowed under a skin of ice. The ditches held brown water, with a lid already forming on it. Every fence sang a little in the wind, not loudly, not prettily, but with a steady wire hum that traveled through Asa's teeth. There were ranch houses scattered across that part of the plain, but winter changed the rules of distance. A porch might look close for an hour and still stand 2 miles beyond a creek cut. Smoke might lift from a chimney and belong to a house where the dogs were fed better than any stranger. Asa had slept in enough sheds to know that empty places were easier than kind ones. Empty places made no promises, and promises made men expect a price. Toward dusk, he reached a place the road map would have called a ranch if the road map had cared about what a ranch became after bankruptcy. A line of cottonwoods marked a dry creek. A square of leaning corral panels stood beside a loading chute, tilted into the weeds. Beyond it, the land rose in 3 low shelves, each one holding brittle grass and the black ribs of old snow fence. There was no house he could see, only a broken windmill far to the north, and a long mound of weathered hay pressed low by age and ice. The wind shoved sleet across the open ground. It did not fall so much as travel sideways, clicking against dry stems, brightening the fence wire and the dead grass. Asa stepped through a gap where a gate had once hung and listened. He listened for engines, dogs, voices, cattle. He heard nothing but wire, frozen grass, and somewhere far off a loose sheet of tin slapping in a regular, irritated rhythm. An abandoned ranch could still have a cellar. It could still have a shed corner, a collapsed feed room, a sheep wagon parked behind a cottonwood. Asa searched with the patience of a boy who had once found half a sack of oats under fallen roofing and lived on parched grain for 2 days. The main shack had burned years before. He found black stones in a rectangle and nails like dull seeds in the ash. The old barn had caved in at the center, leaving its side walls standing like a pair of hands that had dropped what they were holding. Snow from the last squall had blown through every crack. No corner there would keep heat, and no roof there would keep weight. The hay mound interested him more. It was not a stack exactly. It lay along the north side of a shallow rise, too straight to be natural, too low to be worth stealing, with a face of gray thatch and a back crusted over with old, blown dirt. The grass immediately south of it was shorter and darker, as if animals had once stood there through many winters. Asa scraped at the edge with his boot and found not loose hay but packed layers, straw and willow and sod, pressed together hard as old bread. He had seen ranchers bank straw against calf sheds and dig snow pits for lambs, but this was older and better made. The mound lay across the wind like a shoulder. If a man dug into the lee side carefully, not deep enough to collapse the roof of thatch, he might make a sleeping hollow, where his own body heat would count for something. It would be mean shelter. But mean shelter was still shelter. The storm would thicken after dark. He could smell it coming through the sleet, a raw metal smell behind the animal smell of frozen grass. Asa took off his gloves because wet gloves made poor hands. He cut a rectangle in the crust with the spade and lifted sod in quiet, deliberate pieces. He set each piece aside in order, grass up, so he could close the cut around himself later. The ground was stiff for the first 4 inches, then sandy beneath, full of hair-fine roots. He dug forward and down, shoulders working under his coat, breath smoking out of him. Every stroke had to be modest. A tired man who hurried with a short-handled spade would bruise his knuckles, split the skin of his palms, and spend the night feeling his own pulse in every cut. The hollow took shape slowly. He dug a place for his hips first, then widened for his shoulders, then undercut a little on the downwind side so the sleet would pass over the mouth. The old hay gave off a dry sweetness. Under it was another smell. Not rot, not exactly. It was the warm, dense scent of old bedding, cattle breath long gone into straw, and something mineral like a closed well. He was working by feel when the spade struck wood. The sound was too clean for root and too dull for stone. Asa froze with the blade still in the cut. The wind ran along the mound, rubbing sleet over the grass. He scraped with 2 fingers and touched a flat board, smooth on its upper face, though it had lain under packed earth for years. He cleared more soil. The board was narrow. The edge curved where someone had shaved it to fit against another piece. A line of tarred cloth lay along the seam. Asa sat back on his heels. His first thought was cellar. His second was grave, which made his hand leave the board. He waited, listening for whatever a buried thing might say if it was not finished being buried. The wind answered him. The loose tin answered him from the barn. Then, beneath those noises, through the soles of his boots and the palm pressed to earth, he felt a pulse, not a heartbeat. He did not believe in that kind of foolishness. It was a tick and pause, faint and far, like a wooden lever touching an iron stop somewhere under the ground. He widened the cut another handspan. Warm air slid out, not enough to comfort him, just enough to prove that below the frost there was a place winter had not reached. It carried the smell of damp wool, banked ash, boiled oats, and something sharp, maybe vinegar or sour milk. Asa leaned close until his cheek hovered above the seam. The warmth touched him and vanished. He should have put the sod back. That was the rule with useful things found by accident. A man with no right made trouble by lifting lids. He had meant only to cut a hole for himself, not open some old buried work. Still, he was cold enough that warmth became an argument. He slid the spade under the board and raised it no more than the width of a finger. The tick below became 3 quick knocks. Asa let the board drop and grabbed his coat collar as if someone had spoken behind him. He scanned the corrals, the barn, the black line of cottonwoods. Nothing moved in the open land. The wind erased the shallow marks his knees had made in the sleet. 3 knocks came again, more distinct now that he knew where to listen. They traveled through wood and ground, patient rather than frantic. He put his ear near the seam. This time there were not knocks, but a faint scrape, then a drawn-out creak like a gate easing shut far away. A warm thread of air escaped through the cut he had made and streamed against the cold, as if the ground were trying to keep some private bargain and failing because of him. Asa covered the exposed board with 1 piece of sod, then another, but the warmth still leaked around the edges. He packed loose earth into the seam. It was not enough. He could feel the air pulling past his fingers. Somewhere below or beyond him, an old system had noticed the wound. He stood. The storm had taken most of the daylight. The rise and the mound and the broken pens had become shapes in blue-gray air. He looked north, toward the windmill, because the buried board ran that way. Nothing there but the crooked tower, 4 legs black against the sleet. Then the loose tin near the barn slapped once, twice, and stopped. In the space after it stopped, he heard a cow bawl. It came from somewhere no cow should have been, low and muffled, beyond the rise to the east. Asa turned that way. The old ranch seemed larger now that the dark was filling its hollows. He left the spade at the cut and climbed the shallow rise, bent against the wind. The grass on the crest was cropped close. Snow fence remnants made a broken lattice along the top, and beyond them, the land dropped into a bowl he had not seen from the road. The house was there. It sat so low in the draw that it seemed less built than folded into the earth. Sod rose halfway up its walls. Straw bales, old and blackened by weather, banked the north side. Its roof was not peaked, but long and rounded, with a thick skin of grass and willow mats held down by rails. No chimney stood above it. A dull orange light showed in one square window, no bigger than a feed box door. From the road, from the burned ranch yard, from anywhere a hurried man would look, it would have seemed like part of the hill. A small covered yard lay beside it, enclosed by poles and woven brush. Beyond the yard, a shed extended into the slope. Something big moved inside, striking wood with a horn or shoulder. The cow bawled again. Asa's stomach tightened. An occupied house was worse than an abandoned one. Occupied meant dogs, guns, questions, ownership. Occupied meant he had dug into someone else's winter works. He backed one step toward the ridge, then saw the door of the covered yard jump against its latch. A red cow shoved her head through the gap between 2 poles, her eyes rolling white in the dim. Frost hung from her muzzle. She was not trying to escape. She was trying not to fall. He could have left. The storm would cover his tracks before full dark. Whoever lived in that hidden house might never know who had cut into the mound. But the cow shoved again and bawled with the raw, foolish terror of an animal trapped in a place that had ceased to make sense. Asa had spent more nights among cattle than people. He knew that sound. Panic in one animal could ruin a whole shelter by morning. He went down into the draw. The yard gate had sagged where its lower hinge strap pulled from rotten wood. Sleet had glazed the threshold into a slick hump. Inside the covered yard, 3 cows stood flank to flank in straw, heads low, steam rising off their backs. The red cow had one hind foot thrust through a broken plank where the floor met the bedding trench. She had dropped her weight wrong and wedged herself to the hock. Each struggle twisted the plank and tore the hide above the joint. "Easy," Asa said, because cattle knew a voice before they knew a plan. "Easy, girl. No use breaking 2 things." A chain rattled from the dark near the house wall. Asa lifted both hands, palms out, not turning too fast. An old woman stood in the low doorway between house and yard, holding a lantern in one hand and a short stock hook in the other. She was tall in the way people became tall by refusing to bend, not by having much height. Her hair was gray and braided tight against her neck. One eye was clouded pale. The other watched him as if measuring rope. "You from Moat's truck?" she asked. "No, ma'am." "Then you were from bad luck." "Most likely." The lantern moved slightly. Its light reached his torn coat, his empty belt, the mud on his knees. "What did you open?" Asa looked back toward the ridge, though the cut was hidden beyond it. The pull of warm air seemed to pass through him now. "I thought the haybank was dead. I dug a sleep hole. Hit boards!" The old woman closed her good eye for 1 second. It was not prayer and not surprise. It was calculation reaching an unpleasant total. "You cut the north bed. I covered it. If covering fixed a cut, nobody would need stitching. She stepped into the yard, favoring one leg but not enough to call it a limp. "Can you handle cattle?" "Yes." "Then handle what you scared loose." She did not thank him for staying. He did not expect it. A clear order was easier than kindness. Asa moved slowly around the cows, talking under his breath. The red cow trembled all the way through her body. Her breath came hot and sour in the cold. He found a broken rail leaning against the wall and slid it beside her trapped leg, not touching yet. He needed her weight forward. He searched for a rope and found one hanging on a peg, stiff but usable. The old woman saw his glance. Use the soft lay, not the blue one. Blue is for the well dog. Asa did not ask what a well dog was. He took the soft rope, made a loop, and eased it over the cow's horns. The other two animals shifted, uneasy. The covered yard smelled of manure, hay, animal heat, and the metallic cold coming through the gap where the plank had broken. Asa tied the rope to a post at shoulder height, not tight, then leaned into the cow's hip with steady pressure. "Talk," he said. The old woman looked annoyed. "To you or her?" "To her." She gave a sound that might have been a laugh before it hardened. Then she spoke to the cow in a low, flat stream of words without sweetness. She called her Sable, though the cow was red. Told her she had made poor decisions before and survived them. Told her no one was impressed. Told her to put her fool head forward. Her voice made a kind of fence. The cow leaned into it. Asa slid the rail down, pried the broken plank just enough, and lifted the hock clear with his hand under the joint. The cow came free in a violent scramble. Asa threw himself against the next post to avoid being knocked down. The old woman slapped the cow's shoulder with the stock hook, not hard, just enough to turn panic into direction. Sable stumbled into the deeper straw and stood there blowing, one leg trembling but bearing weight. The old woman crouched beside the broken plank. Cold air was spilling through the hole, visible as a thin crawling whiteness near the floor. Beneath the plank, instead of plain dirt, Asa saw a narrow trench lined with old tin and willow rods. Air moved through it with purpose. "You did not only scare a cow," she said. "You opened the house's winter skirt from the wrong end. I didn't know there was a house. That is why it lasted." Her name was Drew Halpin. She told him after the first patch, not before. Until then, he was boy. "You, and hold that." She gave him no welcome into the house. They worked in the covered yard under lantern light while the sleet hardened into pellets and the dark pressed down over the draw. The patch was not a board over a hole. Drew made that plain without explaining more than the task required. The broken floor plank had been a lid over a narrow air run. The run belonged to a web of trenches around the house and yard, some carrying cold air low and slow, some carrying dampness away, some drawing animal heat under the floor before it rose through slotted stones near the inner wall. Asa's cut in the north bed had changed the pull, and the broken plank in the yard had made it worse. The house had begun drinking cold from two places and giving heat to neither. He fetched the sod pieces from his sleep hole. Drew sent him back twice for the dirt he had thrown aside, because the order of layers mattered. Frozen side out, root side in, straw between. Do not make a proud patch. Wend loves an edge. He worked by lantern and memory, kneeling in the sleet on the ridge while his fingers went numb. The cut looked smaller now and more shameful. A careless rectangle in a thing made by people who had thought about winter harder than he had thought about most of his life. He laid the boards back, packed the tarred seam with damp clay Drew had sent in a covered pail, pressed straw into it, then set the sod in the same order he had lifted it. When he finished, he put his cheek to the ground. No warmth touched him. That should have satisfied him. Instead, it felt like being shut out by something that had been trying not to die. Back at the yard, Drew had him cut a willow mat from a roll under the manger. They lashed it beneath the broken plank, spread a layer of straw, and covered the floor gap with 2 half rails and a plate of old sheet iron punched with rows of nail holes. Drew drove pegs with the side of the stock hook. Asa held the plate down with both knees. By then, night had settled. The house's small window burned steadily. The storm thickened into a dry rattle that struck the roof and slid down the sod bank. Asa's hands shook when the work stopped. Drew stood, listening. North bed stopped pulling. Asa rubbed his palms together. "How can you tell?" The draft string quit lying. She pushed open the low door with her shoulder and finally let him see inside. The first room wasn't large, but it held heat the way a wool blanket held the shape of a body after someone rose from it. Its walls were plastered with clay over woven willow. The ceiling beams were peeled poles, blackened by age and smoke. No fire burned in the small iron stove, yet warmth entered through a row of flat stones along the floor, each stone set with a narrow slit. A kettle sat on the stove's back plate, steaming from heat that came from underneath. Bundles of dried grass hung from rafters. Harness parts lined one wall. A table stood under the little window, its legs shortened to fit the low ceiling. Asa stopped just inside. Homes made him careful. He knew how to enter a bunkhouse, a cook tent, a stock shed. A home had rules that were not nailed up. Drew pointed to a bench near the door. "Sit there. Boots stay on the mat. Do not lean against the west wall. It listens to water." He sat. His body, having been denied permission to rest all day, nearly folded in half. Drew set the lantern on the table and took a strip of cloth from a nail beside the stove. The cloth hung limp. She opened a small wooden slide near the floor. The cloth lifted, then settled at a slant. "Still wrong," she said. "Because of my cut?" "Because of your cut, the cow's foolishness, and the north wind finding new teeth. Trouble likes company." She gave him a tin cup of hot water darkened with something bitter. It was not tea. It might have been willow bark or burned barley. He drank it anyway. The heat went down his throat and made his empty stomach wake painfully. "How long has this been here?" he asked. Drew took off her lantern glove finger by finger. "Longer than men who sign papers about it." "Is it yours?" Her good eye narrowed. "Tonight it is occupied. That matters more." He did not ask again. A dull bell struck somewhere beneath the floor. One note, then silence. Drew looked toward the west wall. "The well dog is late." Asa thought of the blue rope and the air trench and decided there were too many things in the house with names. "What is it?" "Not an animal. A weighted rake in the well sleeve. When the windmill pulls enough water, the dog drops and rings once. It should have rung before full dark." She took the lantern again. "Eat 1 spoon of oats. Then we go north." He looked at her clouded eye, at her bad leg, at the way she held herself with the stiff economy of someone running out of strength but unwilling to spend any of it on complaint. "I can go." "You do not know what north is here." The oats were thick, unsalted, and the best thing Asa had tasted in 2 days. Drew watched him take only 1 spoon as ordered, then nodded once, as if he had passed a test he had not known he was taking. They went out through the covered yard, past the cows, into the storm. Drew carried the lantern low. Its light did not reach far. Sleet cut through it like thrown sand. The path north from the house did not follow the visible ground. It wound between low posts, capped with white bone. Asa had taken them for fence remnants until Drew touched each one as she passed. They were markers, set just high enough to find with a hand in drifted snow. Beyond the covered yard, The hidden house disappeared behind them almost at once. Asa looked back and saw only a dark fold in a darker hill. The orange window was covered from the outside by a hanging brush screen. If he had walked within 20 yards of it in daytime, he might have missed it. That thought troubled him. He had believed himself sharp because hunger made him attentive, but attention trained by need still missed what was designed to survive being missed. The windmill stood at the north lip of the draw. Its wheel turned badly, not with the clean, restless spin of a working mill, but in stiff shudders. Ice had formed along the lower vanes. Each turn pulled a rod that vanished into a timber box at the base. The box was banked with straw and sod, and from one side of it, a pipe ran low under the ground toward the house. Drew lifted a small hatch on the timber box. Listen. Inside, something scraped without rhythm. Wood on iron. The sound made Asa think of a calf trying to breathe through a nose packed with mud. The pump froze? The pump is stubborn. The drop line is freezing above the check. Worse, the dog cannot fall. If it cannot fall, the gate under the cistern stays half open. If it stays half open, the house spends warmth holding water it cannot use. Asa crouched and looked into the box. A chain ran over a grooved wheel. Beside it hung a flat iron weight, shaped roughly like a dog, with 2 ears and a snout cut by hand. It had dropped halfway and stuck against a swollen guide. Who makes a weight look like a dog? Someone tired of children being afraid of machines. The guide was packed with clear ice where wind-driven sleet had found a crack. Drew handed him a narrow copper pan and a capped jar. Warm vinegar, not flame. Flame lies to frozen iron. It gives fast and takes more. He worked the pan under the guide, pouring a little warm vinegar over the ice, waiting while it smoked sour in the lantern light. Drew kept one hand on the chain, feeling motion. The windmill turned above them with ugly jerks. Twice the wheel clanged and made Asa duck, though nothing fell. His coat stiffened with ice. His fingertips burned, then seemed to leave him. When the guide loosened, the iron dog dropped 3 inches and struck its bell. The note was small but sure. It traveled through the timber box into the ground. A few seconds later, from somewhere down in the buried line, there came an answering knock. Drew breathed out. It was the first relieved sound he had heard from her. "House heard." The phrase might have sounded fanciful from another person. From Drew, with vinegar freezing on her sleeve and the lantern throwing hard light over her face, it sounded like ordinary mechanics. Asa pushed the hatch shut and packed straw back over it. What happens if the house does not hear? Depends how cold the night wants to be. The night wanted to be very cold. By morning, the draw was gone beneath driven snow. Not deep snow, not yet, but a skin of white hard enough to scrape sound out of every step. Asa woke on the door bench under a horse blanket that smelled of dust and lanolin. For a second, he did not know where he was. The ceiling was too low. The room was too warm. Then a cow shifted in the covered yard, and a slotted floor stone clicked softly as heat moved beneath it. Drew was already awake. She sat at the table with a pencil stub, marking a board ruled into squares. Her braid lay over one shoulder. A gray cat with one torn ear watched Asa from the wood box. The cat had not shown itself the night before, which made Asa respect it. "You can leave when the south line clears," Drew said without looking up. Asa sat up too fast and felt the room tilt. "I wasn't asking to stay." "No. Hungry men rarely ask. They hover near the shape of asking and hope someone else does the rude work." He had no answer to that. She pushed a tin plate toward him. 2 oatcakes, thin as leather, and a piece of boiled beet dark with syrup. "Eat, then look at what you opened." He ate more slowly than his body wanted. The window showed only a pale square. No sunrise, just snowlight. He noticed things he had missed at night. A row of iron hooks marked with small brands burned into the wood above them. A shelf of folded wool, each bundle tied with a different knot. A rack of wooden tags shaped like narrow leaves. A sloping box under the table where warm air rose through a screen to dry gloves. On the west wall hung 3 strips of rawhide threaded through holes, each with knots and bits of tin crimped at different places. Drew saw his eye on them. Wind reads those. They move when pressure changes under the skirt. The skirt is the buried trenches. The skirt is what the house wears against winter. Trenches, sod, bedding, dry wells, air boards, cattle yard, snow fence, straw ribs. Men like one word for one thing. Winter does not. He followed her outside after breakfast. The world had shrunk to the draw and the fences nearest it. Drew gave him a forked ash stick and a pair of rawhide mitts lined with rabbit skin. They fit badly, but kept the wind from taking the skin off his knuckles. They began at the place he had dug. In daylight, his mistake was plain. The north bed was not a hay mound, but one arm of a buried sheltering wall that curved around the hidden house and cattle yard. Snow had swept over it smoothly. Only the repaired patch showed a faint square where the grass lay differently. Drew made him scrape one corner and show her the layers. Say them, he frowned. Sod, straw, board, tar cloth, willow, air. Not air, space. Air does not stay unless space is shaped. He repeated it correctly. She nodded. From there, she showed him the outer ring. Bone-topped posts marked a walking line between hidden lids. Each lid covered some part of the system: a dry sump, a mouse screen, a frost pocket, a place where warm air from the cattle yard could be admitted or shut away. Some had handles made from horseshoes half buried in earth. Others opened only with a hooked tool. None were marked in words from the outside. Their pattern made sense only if one walked it with a body that already knew the house existed. They reached a low mound east of the covered yard. Drew brushed snow aside and revealed a glass square set under wire. "Sun box," she said. "There's no sun. There will be. Not today." The box warms stones below. Slow heat. Honest heat. It keeps the potato room above freezing when cows are dry. Asa crouched, peering through scratched glass. He saw black stones below, arranged in rows like sleeping animals. One row had shifted. The soil near the edge had sunk. That from my cut? No, from the ground settling where the old Badger Run crosses under. I had hoped it would wait until spring. It has poor manners. He almost smiled. What do we do? You dig, since you started a career of it. This digging was nothing like cutting a sleep hole. Drew set a canvas sheet to catch snow and topsoil. She made him loosen only the east edge, then slide his hand under the glass frame to feel for the collapsed air pocket beneath the stones. The ground there was warmer than the air, damp and close. He found the void with his fingertips, then found the sagging willow rib over it. They spent 3 hours repairing a hole smaller than a feed sack. Asa cut new willow from a stack beneath the covered yard. Drew showed him how to bend each rib over steam from a kettle set on a floor stone. Not too much or it would crack later. They lifted the shifted stones, replaced the rib, packed dry grass under the frame, and set a clay wedge shaped like a thumb at the corner to keep meltwater out. Through all of it, Drew gave instructions, as if he had always been expected, and still might prove temporary. She did not soften a word. She did not waste any. Asa found that easier than praise. Praise made him wary. Instruction left him room to be useful. At noon, the sky cleared for less than an hour. Sun broke through low clouds, and the entire plain flashed white. From the ridge, Asa could see how well the hidden house had been placed. The old burned ranch yard lay exposed on the west shelf, visible from the road. The broken barn drew the eye. The empty corral seemed to explain the place, but the draw east of the rise held its own weather. Snow fences caught drift at angles that made natural-looking banks. The sod roof of the house curved into the hill. Smoke from the stove did not rise in a plume. It threaded underground through a long, cooling flue and came out far north in a patch of brush where wind tore it flat. People rode past all these years, Asa asked. People see stories first. Empty ranch, burned house, bad well. No reason to look twice. But it is occupied. Drew looked at the house with an expression that was not pride. Pride would have been simpler. It has to be. An empty house dies faster than a sick calf. A place like this goes wrong quietly. A lid warps, a mouse screen fills, a snowboard falls, and by the time someone remembers it, there is nothing left but damp rooms and cleverness wasted. Why keep it hidden then? Because some people can only understand use by owning it. That was the most she said for another hour. The first stranger came that afternoon, though he was not the threat Asa expected. A horse appeared at the south rim of the draw, head low, reins dragging. He was a bay gelding with a white chin and ice knots in his mane. He wore a saddle but no rider. He stood on the ridge trembling, one hind leg cocked, sides dark with sweat under the frozen hair. Asa moved before Drew spoke. He took a coil of rope and climbed wide around the gelding, keeping his shoulders turned away. The horse watched him with one wild eye. Blood had dried along one stirrup leather, where a broken buckle had rubbed him. Asa talked in the same low way he had used with Sable, not asking, not promising. When he caught the reins, the horse lowered his head as if shame had weight. The saddle carried a canvas tube tied behind the cantle. Inside was a rolled notice wrapped in oilskin and a county map with red pencil marks. Drew read it standing in the covered yard, her mouth set thin. Kester Moat bought winter removal rights on the north lease, she said. What does that mean? It means he paid someone far from here to take down old fence, lift dead equipment, and haul abandoned lumber before spring. Asa looked at the hidden house, the snow fences, the low mounds that were not abandoned anything. Can he? He can take what he can find and misunderstand the rest. The rider came an hour later, walking crooked through the snow, with one arm held tight against his ribs. He was a broad man in a shearling coat, too fine for the work, and he had the red, angry face of someone who had fallen hard and decided to blame geography. His name was Van Clegg. He said it twice before anyone asked. He had been marking access for Moat's crew when his horse spooked at an open badger hole hidden by snow. There's no house on this quarter, Van said after Drew brought him into the first room and made him sit on the bench. He looked around with the offended wonder of a man finding a locked room inside a building he intended to strip. This tract is listed vacant. Drew set a cup of hot vinegar water beside him. Drink. I need to get back to my truck. You need to stop shivering before you make yourself stupid permanent. He stared at her. Who are you? Occupied. Asa turned away to hide the quick movement at the corner of his mouth. Van drank because pain had made him less proud. While Drew bound his ribs with a long cloth, Asa checked the bay gelding's leg and found no break, only strain and rubbed skin. He rubbed the horse down with straw, loosened the cinch, and set him in a pole stall. In the saddlebag, he found chalk flags, survey nails, and a folded sketch showing the old snow fences marked as salvageable rail and post. One red line crossed directly over the north bed where Asa had dug. By evening, Van was warm enough to speak in threats again. He told Drew that Moat's crew would come by morning with a sled rig if the road stayed passable. He said they had paperwork. He said hidden occupation could be trespass. He said old improvements reverted to the leaseholder. He used words like liability and nuisance, which Asa had noticed were words men used when they wanted other men to feel smaller without raising a hand. Drew listened while winding the rawhide wind strips back onto their wall pegs. "Will your crew know not to cut the drift spine?" "The what?" "The answer is no. You can explain it to the office. Winter is here. The office is not." Van looked at Asa. "You working for her?" Asa thought of the foreman saying winter book. He thought of the sleep hole patched shut behind him. He thought of how an empty road could turn a man into something less than trespass because no one cared enough to call him by any name at all. "I'm working," he said. It was not an answer, but it was the first sentence all day that felt like ground under his boots. Before dawn, the west wall clicked 3 times. Drew rose from the table as if the sound had lifted her by the spine. She laid her palm against the clay plaster. A strip of rawhide near the floor trembled, snapped flat, and trembled again. Blue cold. Van opened his eyes from the blanket pile. "What does that mean?" "The sleeve from the spring is icing, and the house is starting to spend warmth on water instead of bodies." She was already reaching for her coat. "If it backs under the floor stones, they split. If they split, the cattle trench smokes wrong. If that happens, your paperwork will be the warmest thing left here." The spring box lay in plum brush west of the house, buried beneath a low cap of straw, clay, and snow. Drew would not let Van come. She put him by the stove with the stock hook and told him not to touch anything marked blue, red, white, or unmarked, which left him sitting very still. Asa went with her into a dawn so cold that every breath felt like it had corners. The lid of the spring box had frozen tight. Asa wanted to chop it loose, but Drew made him lay warm cloths along the seam and wait until the ice surrendered without splintering the wood. Under the lid, black water moved in a stone throat. A wooden float arm bobbed weakly, pinned by a collar of ice and a chain of willow hoops that had slipped over a peg. Asa reached into the water up to his shoulder. Cold bit him so hard his eyes watered. He freed the chain with a notched bone needle, while Drew held the lantern and counted the float's rise under her breath. When the float lifted, a small bell rang beneath the ground. A moment later, a polite knock answered from the house, carried through pipe and timber and shaped space. "House heard," Drew said. The phrase stayed with Asa as they packed the lid again. The house did not hear like a person. It heard because people had arranged wood, water, weight, and air so that one small correction could call to the next. It was not magic. It was labor, made patient. Smoke met them when they returned. Van stood by the west wall with his hand half raised, guilt already on his face. "I barely touched it," he said. Drew looked at the blue slide pulled one notch out of place. "You invited wet air through the fire path." The room had gone wrong in layers. Smoke did not rise cleanly toward the cooling flue. It crawled low, searching for lungs. The floor stones cooled under Usa's boots. Drew lifted a square hatch beneath the table, revealing a narrow crawl lined with willow and tin. She handed Asa a fist-sized lamp and a hooked iron tool. "Left shoulder down. Count 7 ribs. The 7th has a red tooth. Pull it once. Not twice." The crawl was tighter than any calf chute and meaner than a culvert. Asa slid into it while smoke thickened against his cloth mask. He counted the ribs by touch. Smooth, cracked, wrapped, damp, warm, nail-headed. Then the 7th. The red tooth resisted. Fear filled the small space behind him, pressing harder than clay. He pulled toward his belt. The lever clicked once. The smoke hesitated, then turned away as if a gate had opened somewhere it trusted. When he came out coughing, Drew did not praise him. She put a cup in his hand and opened the door to the cattle yard for one clean breath. Later, while the air cleared, she laid a bundle on the table. It wasn't a diary. It was better than a diary. Strips of old bridle leather were burned with brands and punched with holes. Cedar shingles carried dates, storm marks, and repairs. Twine knots held tin scraps that counted winters. Tight knots for closed storms, loose knots for thaw, horsehair for stock lost, copper wire for a repair that had held. Wooden leaf tags bore names and work instead of ownership. Light a turn set the first cooking hollow, Drew said. Fenna Root built the north bed. Jory Pelham moved the spring line after the well soured. Hale Binder cleared the frost throat with 2 fingers gone. Asa touched none of it. Some names had letters. Some had marks. Some were tied to ranch brands that no longer existed. The past lay there as a record of people who had made warmth and water without waiting to be invited into history. What was this place? He asked. A ranch house, Drew said, and a winter fold. Owners kept homes on high ground. Hands had tents and wagons, and the mercy of whoever held the keys. That mercy froze. So cooks, well men, cattle boys, widows, children, and whoever could carry sod, built this draw into something that did not ask a rich man when weather turned. It stayed hidden because found things get locked, taxed, stripped, or called unsafe by people who arrive after the danger. A low moan traveled through the wall. Drew's hand closed over the bundle. Drift spine. They climbed into a whitening wind and found Moat's crew on the ridge, exactly where Van's red pencil line crossed the live north bed. 2 workers had brought a sled rig and a small tractor. A loose section of old snow fence slapped and bowed in the gusts. To them, it looked like salvage. To Asa, after one day in the house's service, it looked like a bone-holding skin over an artery. "Leave that rail," he shouted. The tractor driver stared through blowing snow. The second worker had already hooked a cable to the fence foot. Asa ran in, lifted the cable off, and took a shove that dropped him to one knee. The tractor lurched. The fence tilted. The ground boomed hollow beneath them, and a seam opened in the snow, breathing warm fog into the storm. Drew arrived with the lantern under her coat. "Drag that out, and you bury the north bed. Bury the north bed, and the house loses air. The cattle yard follows. Then the spring line freezes. Then your vacant quarter becomes a grave with paperwork." The tractor driver killed the engine. His name was Amos Lear. The second worker, Felda Bond, stopped arguing when Drew showed her warm air rising from the split. Van, wrapped in a blanket and gray with pain, said, "I marked it wrong." Those 4 words changed the work. They did not erase the damage, but they put hands where mouths had been. They used the crew's canvas as a windbreak, and their stakes as temporary ribs. Asa found old iron sockets under the snow where the fence feet belonged. One socket had swallowed a notched locking stone that had shifted sideways when the rail tore loose. He worked it free with the stock hook, drove the new pin through the fence foot, and seated the rail while Amos leaned on the lever and Felda held the canvas against the wind. When the fence dropped into its old angle, the moaning stopped. Then the covered yard cracked. Snow had overloaded the willow roof above the cows. One pole had snapped. Sable and the other animals crowded toward the inner wall, pushing heat and panic into the house. Asa moved the cattle before anyone explained the danger. He knew how fear traveled through a herd. He and Felda turned them into the side passage with coats and low voices, while Drew cut loose a white-ended canvas cover that had hung unused for years. Amos lifted 2 short poles. Van held the lantern. Together, they hauled the canvas under the broken section and made a sloped false ceiling. Snow slid off it in heavy sheets. The roof held, but the bedding trench beneath the cattle had packed solid with wet straw and frozen manure. Without that trench, the house could not borrow animal warmth. Asa crawled beneath the yard with a short rake and a wooden scoop, working in heat and stink and hoof thuds until the blockage broke apart. Air moved past his wrists, thick and warm, and the 3 wooden leaves Drew set by the floor stones lifted in the correct direction. By night, the storm had spent its worst anger. The hidden house stood low in its draw, wounded and working. Amos and Felda no longer spoke of salvage. They spoke of pins, braces, and what they had touched. Van wrote live winter waterworks across the red line of his own map. When Kester Moat arrived the next clear morning with clean gloves and ownership papers, he found not an old fence to remove, but 5 witnesses prepared to describe what happened when that fence was misunderstood. Drew did not plead. She demonstrated. She opened only the lids that could be safely opened in cold. Asa showed the north bed patch he had cut and repaired. Drew made him name the layers in front of Moat: sod, straw, board, tar cloth, willow, shaped space. Amos turned the windmill by hand until the iron dog dropped and rang. Felda held wooden leaves above the floor stones and watched them lean. Van explained the spring line, poorly but honestly. Eli Sign, one of Moat's men, knelt by the road barrel and admitted that water had remained there through freezes when every pump for miles had failed. Moat did not soften. Men like him often called retreat caution and caution policy, but he understood liability when it breathed warm through a cut in the snow. He agreed to postpone removal until a county review. Hollis Crane from the records office came 2 days later and found an old survey margin that said, "Occupied in winter, do not fill." It had no signature. Drew said it had Lyda Turn's sense, which mattered more to her than ink with a title. The review did not save the house all at once. Nothing important was saved all at once. It gave them time to draw a public map that showed the spring, the road barrel, the drift spine, the windmill dog, the sunbox, the covered yard, and the south apron, without exposing every hidden latch. Time to replace the torn fence foot and patch the yard roof. Time for Asa to move from the door bench to the east shed, where he banked the walls with dead straw from outside the live works and built a narrow shelf for his tin cup. He was afraid of the shelf. He did not say so. A shelf meant a wall expected him tomorrow. A bunk meant a man had to explain leaving it. But the east shed was cold, honest, and close enough to hear the house bell. That suited him. Winter narrowed and held. Asa learned the ring by repetition. He brushed the smoke outlet before snow could cap it. He checked the sunbox glass with a cloth, not his glove. He opened frost pockets only long enough to let ice form where it could be taken away. He carried water to the lower road barrel and watched travelers drink from a source they never saw. The first time he walked to the south store for vinegar, lamp wick, oats, and hinge straps, he expected the road to turn him back into what he had always been. Instead, he returned at dusk with supplies on his shoulder, angry at the relief he felt when the bone-topped posts appeared. Near the end of the hard cold, Drew gave him a blank wooden leaf tag. Outer ring needs another name. For chores? He asked. For witness? For blame? For return? Depends on the weather. He burned Asa Kendry into it with a nail heated over the stoveplate. Under that, Drew made him add north bed cut and patch, because the house did not collect flattering lies. Then, after a long silence, she told him to add winter hand. The thaw came with water ticking under snow. Asa made the proper repairs where emergency patches had held. He reset the notched locking stone in its own north socket. He rebuilt the stock hollow wall with willow ribs bent over steam. He helped Hollis copy the work names without turning them into a museum exhibit. Moat's removal rights became tangled in protections, water claims, testimony, and the practical embarrassment of having nearly frozen a house he insisted was not there. One pale morning, a wagon stopped by the lower road barrel. Two adults climbed down stiff with cold, and a girl held a weak lamb under her coat. They looked toward the burned ranch yard first, because that was the story the open land told. Empty. Failed. No help. Then they saw Asa coming down from the ridge with the hooked tool in his hand. Drew stood behind him at the outer gate. She did not hide the house. She did not reveal more than need required. Need? She asked. Asa looked at the lamb, the cracked wheel, the adults trying not to hope too loudly. Need. Work? The man had already put his shoulder under the wagon bed so the woman could free the wheel strap. The girl was rubbing the lamb's ears to keep it from slipping away. Work enough to start, Asa said. Drew handed him the latch hook. He opened the winter line to the first notch, careful not to spend heat like pride. Warm air moved around his boots and went no farther than it should. He took the lamb from the girl and felt its small ribs flicker against his palms. Behind him, the low house waited in its fold of earth, straw, water, and remembered hands. It was not empty because someone had hidden inside it. It was occupied because people kept choosing to answer what weather asked. Asa led them down carefully, counting the first tasks before anyone crossed the threshold. Close the gate behind Need, dry the lamb, check the floor leaves, watch the cattle trench after new bodies entered, and tell the strangers what every person entering the fold had to learn before warmth could be trusted. Open what you must, close what you can, repair what proves you were here.